Hello everyone, I'm Wendell Jones and welcome to this edition of our program Jones and Company. On this program we look at the national issues of the Bahamas, and this has been quite a week here in the Bahamas because the budget debate continued last week, and we had a major protest in our country over taxes. And today on our program we're going to talk about the economy of the Bahamas and matters financial. And we have a very special guest on our program today. We are delighted to have Mr. Julian Francis, the former governor of the Central Bank of the Bahamas, who served for many years in that institution, and prior to that spent a whole lot of time in offshore banking. And he is currently heading a number of boards in our country, and so he is quite able to answer the many questions on the economy of the Bahamas. Mr. Francis, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Good to be here, as always.
Yes, thank you. Godfrey Innes, good to see you.
Yes, I see Mr. Francis occasionally.
You do? Okay, very good, very good.
It's always a pleasure to see my friends, you know?
Yes, yes. You are in a relaxed mode almost these days. I know that you have your duties as chairman of various boards, but you seem to be winding down, Mr. Francis.
No, I wouldn't say so. Wendell, truth is, I think I've always been able to kind of fall back into a bit of a relaxed mode after the heat of the moment. But you're right. I mean, obviously these days my schedule is a bit less blocked up. So I have a bit more time to think about things.
Yes. There are a whole lot of people who are anxious about the economy of the Bahamas, given the announcement of the government of the Bahamas to increase value-added tax by the 1st of July. There are some people who have become a little pessimistic. What are you thinking with respect to the economy?
Well, obviously, during a time when the economy is still struggling, even though this last year, 2017, was a bit better than maybe the last 8 or so years, nevertheless, the growth of the economy was still only about 1.5%, maybe a little less than that actually. And so in that circumstance, obviously the imposition of additional taxation, especially on the heart of the consumer sector, is obviously not an easy decision to make. And so I believe it's inevitable that there is some concern about what that means for the economy in the short and the medium term.
And given the, we had a guest last week on our program who talked about confidence and what it's going to do to confidence in the economy. Are you too concerned that increased taxes will cause people to be a little jittery about the way forward?
Not exactly. I wouldn't put it that way myself. The way I think I would put it is this. I mean, nobody wants additional taxation.
Right.
And especially in our circumstance, which we've just referred to. And then I would say in addition, the fact is that because the value-added tax is really a tax which falls heavily on the lower income segment of the populace, certainly more so than on anybody else, it is bound to result in a certain degree of concern. But I think that there is another side to this which is really important, and that is what it is the government is trying to resolve. The fact is that it's very true that we need to fix the problem. We cannot continue the way things have been going. And they have been going in this direction for quite some time. It's not a phenomenon which has just taken place over the last 5 or even 10 years. It's been going on for a long time. I remember when I was at the central bank, I remember very well. In fact, a few months ago went and looked back at this. I was rebuked by the minister who was responsible for finance at that time for suggesting that the government needed to be cautious and to not be as willing to continue to increase the debt as it appeared to me at the time the government was. And in those days, we were in the neighborhood of 40% of GDP, the level of the debt. Today, before the more recent adjustment that's taken place, we were just about close to 80, twice that level. Quite honestly, this is a point at which we need to fix it. If we don't fix it, frankly, from this point on, it becomes difficult as a country, as an economy, to have any credibility whatsoever, externally, certainly. And even internally, what you find is that the very imposing presence of government debt as a part of the overall picture warps everything else and distorts the economy and shrinks the private sector and so on. So, I fully agree with the idea that this is a problem that has to be fixed.
Yes, fine. I mean, I guess most economists, most accountants would agree with that. And I believe the average man agrees with that too. But the question is, how should it be fixed? Should it be fixed by increased taxes on the average Bahamian, or should it be fixed by seeking to grow the economy?
Right. Were you going to say something, Godfrey? Okay. Well,
That's my question.
yes, I mean, obviously the growth of the economy alternative would be the preferred one, and nobody would disagree with that. Fact is, though, that growing the economy is not something you can just simply decide to do and it happens. I think we probably agree that every government, and certainly the private sector as well, have sought to grow the economy over the years. We are in a period, as I've just referred to it, a period during which the economy has not grown at all. In fact, I think if you look at the performance of the economy over the last 10 years, on average, we have probably shrunk a little bit, on average. Because it's only, as I said, 2017 during which we've now had a bit of growth. If you look at the years for the last 5, 6, 7 years, the economy has been shrinking pretty much. And despite all of the efforts that have been made by successive governments to seek to resolve that problem. So it's not something you can do by simply willing it. To some extent, growth is a factor or is a consequence of partly what's going on the outside as well.
But the argument is being made that at the time when the economy was growing, started to grow, and with Bahama coming on stream and the government boasting about the air arrivals and the occupancy rate, that this is not the time for the disincentive of imposing additional value-added tax, and that more time should have been given to allow growth.
Yes, of course. I mean, I fully understand that point of view, and I think, I assume that the government fully understands it as well. I mean, as much as we sometimes like to take fault at those who have the job of making these things happen. I think when we pull back a bit and really are prepared to be a bit reasonable, we realize and we admit to ourselves that they too are seeing the same things we're seeing. They have the same, well, they have access to the expertise that can arrive at the same conclusions on these points. And to a large extent, they get the same advice as to what the remedies are. Now, I mean, I'm not saying that the sort of pool of experience and expertise which is resident today in the government itself is, let's say, equivalent to that which, you know, exists outside. I'm not saying that because I think that it's true. Well, I know it's true that that's not the case. That if you were to look around at the resources available throughout the economy, and if those resources were available to the government, or some of them, I'm sure it would be helpful. But the only point I'm making is that the government is looking at exactly the same issues, the same ideas, the same proposed solutions as we are.
Are you sure?
No, I'm not sure, but I mean, one can imagine this. Why wouldn't it be that convincing?
Were you consulted?
No, but Wendell, I mean, I'm only one person in a whole range of people who are available, and some of them have been consulted.
But, you know, I see it quite differently.
Okay.
I see it from the perspective that an economic problem is trying to be solved with a political agenda. When you look at the 50 years since majority rule, all right, the first 25 were relatively successful, Mr. Francis. All right?
Okay.
We had a debt of 1.7 something billion. All right? It is the last 25 years, and it's been particularly the last 15 or 16 years, according to the IMF, that we've been having this decline in our economy from the year 2000. And part of the problem is we have been changing governments, and there hasn't been long-term planning. You cannot solve these problems of the economy on a short-term basis, with a short-term agenda.
Yeah.
And I think that is fundamentally because you're trying to appease an electorate.
Yeah. No, I believe that there's something to what you're saying. I really believe that one of the problems that we face is an inability to articulate, or maybe to develop in the first instance, and then to articulate, to sell a longer-term economic development strategy to the Bahamian people, and then to implement it. I think I can accept that. But I don't think that by any means that's the only problem.
No. But I mean, it's not to be the one. That's not the only problem. You see, if with a long-term problem, right, the pressure on the consumer would not be as hard, right? And at the same time, you can address the expansion of the economy, which will ease some of the pressure by creating more jobs and expanding your revenue base. But when you're trying to compact all these things into one short period, the public responds.
Well, again, I believe that the sort of 5-year planning is not helpful. I would agree with you on that point. And so, you know, I think that is something that we need to really think about very seriously, how we fix that particular issue. But coming back to what we were saying, I mean, so the government, I believe, recognizes the points that you've been making. The question is, how do we go about causing growth to happen in the economy? And how do we go about managing the cost of running the country, the governance of the Bahamas and the development of the Bahamas, the cost of doing that. How do we go about correcting this mountain of debt, which we have accumulated over, Godfrey says 15 years. I think it's a little longer than that, but essentially that's what we're talking about. Over that period of time, I think it's more like about 25 years. We have consistently been accumulating this debt. And as I said at the beginning, we're at the point now where we can't go any further. I mean, literally, and this answers, I think, now your point, Wendell. Is this the right moment to impose corrective measures? Do we have any choice? That's the question. And that really is the question. You know, I personally don't know. What I would say is that I agree entirely with the Minister of Finance when he says that we are at the point where we can no longer afford to postpone this problem.
Yeah. But Mr. Francis, the government is seeking to balance a budget in 3 years. This fiscal responsibility bill that has been tabled.
Yeah.
And it is being questioned whether or not that ought to be the goal in that short period of time.
I agree.
Rather than stretching it out
I agree.
over a longer period of time.
That's a very valid question, in my opinion. As I said, we don't know what the Minister of Finance and his immediate advisors know, Financial Secretary and other advisors available to the government. We don't know everything that they know. But I agree entirely with you. The question for me would be, by the way, I don't believe that it's possible to achieve that.
You don't believe it's possible?
No. With all due respect, I do not believe that in 3 years we will balance the fiscal budget. I don't believe that.
Why?
Well, the enormity of the problem is too big.
Yeah.
It's too big. I mean, and that's the point. The pressure which has been created by the mountain of debt, I would call it, which we're facing, is such, and in the face of an economy which is already anemic, how do you do that? How do you do that? I mean, if, as many people fear, if the economy slides back into a sort of negative trajectory, as opposed to the slight positive that we seem to be on at the moment, it makes it even more difficult, because it means that in fact you can put the taxes on the books, but can you collect the money? You know, the more the economy contracts, the less possible it is to extract money from it. And so I don't believe that 3 years is enough time to achieve the balancing of the current budget.
And the imposition of new taxes would probably make it more difficult.
That's what I just said. So in other words, I believe it's going to take a bit longer, even with a fairly aggressive austerity strategy. I think it's going to take a bit longer than 3 years. And to tell you the truth, I even wonder if it is a good idea to try to do it in 3 years. I wonder if it may not have been better to target a more gradual achievement of this objective. Now, I wouldn't add the word longer in there, because once you do that, you go right back into this more relaxed mode where you think this problem is going to solve itself. It's not.
Not necessarily. But let me ask you this question.
Yeah.
You've been governor, and you've interfaced with the IMF. IMF policies, for example, has been disastrous in Barbados. Barbados just last week defaulted on payment. And Barbados has been under IMF watch now for a number of years, right? IMF told them to cut the public service. And as a result of that, there's been a downward spiral in the Barbadian economy, right? There's a view here, Mr. Francis, that the IMF has been, policies have been what we have seemed to be following. What is your view about that?
I think inevitably there's going to be some recognition on the part of the government of what external agencies like the IMF are saying. To say that the IMF or IMF requirements are driving the government's decisions, I don't know if that is necessarily true. I take Minister Turnquest and the Prime Minister, of course, on their word that they have decided to be the ones who will correct this problem that we have been getting ourselves into for such a long period of time. And that, you know, we knew, and it's not the first time this is being said. I mean, we've over the years been saying this, maybe with less urgency, but we've known that we either we're going to have to address this at some point, or we'd find ourselves literally a signature, the economy of the Bahamas, which nobody takes seriously anymore.
Okay, I have to take a break. We on the program Jones and Company, our special guest today, the former governor of the Central Bank, Mr. Julian Francis. We take this break, we'll come right back.